If you weren't the CEO's daughter, I wouldn't date you. Such a plain girl like you. He said that and drenched my head in beer. His abusive words wouldn't stop. Maybe he had too much to drink. I couldn't believe the situation I was in, and I just stood there, unable to respond to his insults. My apologies for keeping you waiting. But his complexion changed at the sound of a voice from behind. Without turning around, I got into the car as suggested. My name is Lydia. As the daughter of a company CEO, I've been treated like a delicate object since I was a kid. I was tired of adults changing their attitudes when they saw my father's presence behind me. Being a quiet child who preferred being alone. As I grew up, I began trying to blend in with the atmosphere around me. I suppressed myself, trying to remain inconspicuous. Even the friends I made through such efforts would distance themselves from me once they learned about my father's job. I used to resent my father's profession, but my perspective changed when I entered a university and started studying business. Through university lectures, I began to understand the difficulty of achieving long-term stable performance like my father. I started to take an interest in my father's company. Hearing about my father's passions and thoughts about the company, my interest grew, and I deepened my learning.
You've been getting good grades in school, and it seems like you have a decent knack for business too. So I guess it wouldn't be a bad idea to let you run the company someday, my father says.
If that's the case, I thought, I would like to create a company culture where the distance between employees is close and everything can be discussed openly. Having had lonely experiences in my childhood, I longed for an atmosphere where everyone could speak freely, regardless of their title or position. It would be wonderful if I could make the company like that when I became the CEO. The evening downtown area is bustling with various people. I check that the clock hand is pointing at 6:50, and I breathe a sigh of relief. I always wanted to arrive before Cooper for our meetups. I take out a small mirror and fix my bangs. While I'm at it, I also reposition my permed hair and the light blue hair ornament. As I throw the mirror back into my handbag, I catch sight of Cooper in a suit, making his way through the crowd. I wave back at Cooper, who is smiling. The place we enter is our usual chain pub. We order simple snacks and draft beer and toast. I loved spending Friday nights chatting about work or just random stuff in this casual place. Cooper and I started dating in our senior year of college, and it's almost 2 years now. We got together because we joined the same seminar. Cooper noticed me, who was quietly hiding in everyone's shadow, and talked to me. Cooper is good at conversation and casually brightens up the atmosphere. I'm a lucky person to be dating him. The planning department at the head office is tough after all. There's a lot of overtime, but the satisfaction makes it worth continuing, Cooper said, finishing his drink, his face showing he had quite a bit to drink. I think being assigned to the planning department means they have expectations of you, Cooper. You're amazing. When will you stop working at the factory, Lydia? If you get transferred to the head office, we could have lunch together. After graduating from the university, I asked my father, who is the CEO, to let me work in the factory. I had a strong desire to know the field. I'd love to have lunch with you, Cooper, but I like working in the factory, and it suits me. Really? I think you're more suited to working at the head office, dressed up and not in work clothes. Cooper looks at me, as if gauging my reaction. That's not true. I feel comfortable in my work clothes, Cooper. Can we order more food? I'm getting hungry. Something feels off. I managed to sidestep it, but lately, I have the feeling that Cooper wants to say something. Could he have found out that I'm the daughter of the CEO? The thought suddenly crosses my mind, and I feel a chill down my spine. I'll remember how my friends drifted away once they found out I was the CEO's daughter. I didn't want to go through that again. I couldn't tell Cooper that I was the CEO's daughter, and he must never find out. Being swayed on a sparsely populated down train, I was gazing out the window. Enjoying the scenery beyond the glass was my daily routine during my commute. It's a beautiful Monday. As the train moves, The scenery changes from a landscape lined with gray buildings to one rich with greenery and trees. My stop is soon after we cross a particularly large river. The river's surface shimmers, reflecting a vibrant blue. I catch a glimpse of a middle-aged man and a puppy crossing the bridge, their figures shrinking in the distance.
Good morning, Lydia. You're early.
I was greeted by a coworker as I exited the station gates. Good morning. I always come at this time on Mondays. It's Austin, 2 years older than me. He's a friendly person who started talking to me on my first day at work, and he's been very helpful in many ways. We make small talk as we head to the factory. After getting prepared and arriving at my post, the workday begins. It was supposed to be a usual day with usual tasks. However, an unexpected accident occurred. It was just before the afternoon work began, right after lunch break. At that time, my father, the CEO, happened to be on a factory tour. Coming out of the break room, I bumped into my father, who asked me to pass on a message to my mother. It seems he had left his smartphone at home. He said he could have sent the message from his computer, but it would have been a hassle, so he was glad he could ask me. After sending off my father to the workshop, I turned around, and to my surprise, there was Austin. He was peeking through the conference room door, which was half open.
Wait, Lydia, you're the CEO's daughter?
What should I do? Austin had asked me. I tried to hastily make an excuse, but nothing comes to mind. Regret over casually chatting with my father wells up. Austin is sure to change his attitude towards me from now on. Word might spread around the factory, and everyone might start keeping their distance from me. Various thoughts swirl around, and I'm left stammering. Then Austin says,
If that's the case, there's something I'd like your help with, Lydia. There are various systems I want changed. Could you tell the CEO for me?
I was taken aback by Austin's unchanged demeanor, but I found myself interested in what he was talking about. What kind of systems are you talking about? When I asked, Austin gave a brief explanation. I wanted to know more, but it was almost time for work to start. We decided to discuss the details after work and return to our posts. We both hurried to our respective workstations. Even after finding out I was the CEO's daughter, Austin didn't change his attitude towards me. On the contrary, he acted as if it was no big deal. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I climbed the stairs to the workshop. Now, I'm sitting across from Austin at a fast food restaurant near the station. Our conversation from earlier in the day has taken an unexpected turn. To put it bluntly, Austin's hope was for decision-making power to be given to the factory floor. He explained that in the current system, any changes to the standard manual requires approval from headquarters. This is necessary even for the most minor changes. After the factory submits a request for approval, an inspection is conducted by headquarters. It then takes time to receive approval. Often, by the time approval is granted, the situation has changed and the change is no longer necessary. However, it takes effort to cancel the application. While finishing his double cheeseburger, Austin said, "So, Lydia, I was thinking of asking the CEO, but that's impossible, right? Still, I can't help but wonder if there's something we could do." I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if this was something I could ask my father. Well, asking the CEO might be difficult, but it does seem like the situation should be changed.
Right? You think so too?
Let's take action. Let's document all past incidents and submit them. We can express our hopes and have them considered at headquarters. I wonder if it will work. Seeing Austin's uncertainty, I start trying to persuade him. Let's just give it our best shot.
Well, nothing's gonna change if we just sit here talking about it.
Starting the next day, we involved our superiors and began gathering information from around the factory. It was tough to juggle with our daily tasks, but our diligent efforts paid off, and we finished the document several months later. We entrusted it to our superiors to match the timing of a general meeting at headquarters, and took a sigh of relief. While I was drinking a canned drink and taking a break, a colleague came up to me. "I heard you finished the document. Good job!" Since we had gone around all the departments in the factory gathering information, everyone knew what was going on. We finally finished. I hope this brings about change.
I'm sure it will be fine. But I was surprised by your initiative, Lydia. You really do have the CEO's blood in you.
Wait, how do you know about that?
Sorry, I heard it from Austin. I was curious about why you were taking action. Don't worry, I'm the only one who knows.
Is that so? Although I felt a bit complicated, I thought my colleague was telling the truth.
It'd be great if you became the CEO, Lydia. You're very diligent and hardworking, and you really went above and beyond for the factory this time.
I could never be the CEO. When I laughed it off, my colleague laughed along, saying,
I guess so.
This person, with laughter lines appearing at the corner of his eyes, is a veteran who has been working at the factory for more than 20 years. He, like Austin, treated me with a consistent demeanor, a constant calmness and brightness that never changed. Several months later, our superior returned from the general meeting and loudly called everyone to gather.
What's going on?
The employees who gathered asked.
The authority at the site has been partially changed.
Hearing these words, the employees began to murmur. I instinctively looked for Austin. Then, on the outskirts of the crowd, he noticed my gaze and responded with a triumphant pose. Although not all of our wishes were granted, it seemed fair to say that nearly half of them were. That day, everyone took turns congratulating me, and I felt very happy. Filled with a sense of achievement and even more motivation, I am enjoying fulfilling days. Then, one day, I was called to headquarters by my father. Wondering why he called me out of the blue, I leave my afternoon work behind and head to the headquarters. Once I enter the CEO's office, my father praises my recent accomplishments. Though I didn't mention anything to him, he seemed to have looked into the situation. Apparently, this incident significantly boosted the company's numbers, and after my father had a good laugh, he made a serious face and said to me,
Lydia, you have a sense for management and vitality. How about you start taking over the role of CEO in earnest?
Hearing my father's words, I thought that I wanted to give it a try. A workplace where employees are vibrant because their opinions are heard and improvements are made. If I become CEO, I can move things on a larger scale. I can make it as comfortable as possible to work. But with that, the responsibility also becomes heavier. I might have almost made up my mind, but I asked him to let me think about it and went home that day. I questioned myself alone in my room. Can I really do it? Can I fulfill this responsibility? I had trouble falling asleep that night, and the next morning, despite the lack of sleep, I visited my father at the headquarters with a clear mind. About our conversation yesterday, I would like to take on the role. I appreciate your trust in me. I bowed deeply. My father said, That's great. Thank you. And started talking about the future schedule.
What? Lydia's gonna be the CEO?
Austin, please don't raise your voice so much. Only Austin and I were in the break room during lunch break. Thinking the timing was just right, I told him about my decision to become CEO.
Sorry. But I never thought you'd really become CEO. Everyone will be surprised.
That's the thing. I think I'll be transferred to the headquarters soon, and I've been worried about how to explain it to everyone.
Why not just tell them the truth?
I'm a little scared to tell them I'm the CEO's daughter. Taking a deep breath, I shared the events of the past. About how close friends had drifted away, the sadness I felt when people were distant with me, and about my childhood when I tended to close off my heart. Austin, who listened to my story with compassion, said this:
There might be people who can't interact with you the same way as before, Lydia. We can't know for sure. But everyone knows how hard you've worked this time. I think they trust you. Plus, surprisingly, many people might not change their attitude.
Could that be true? Although I felt somewhat relieved hearing Austin say that, My heavy memories were rejecting any further thoughts. In the end, I only gave a vague reply. When I checked my smartphone on the way home from work, I had a message from Cooper. I hadn't seen Cooper in a while. Just when I thought I had some breathing room from being busy with document preparation for the headquarters, Cooper's peak season had started. It's not just about everyone at the factory. I need to think about Cooper too. Swaying on the train, I let out a sigh. Could I really say the truth from my own mouth? What would happen if I told them? After a while, the dates of my transfer to the headquarters was confirmed. I would be leaving the factory in a few weeks. Unsure of how to tell everyone, I spontaneously dropped by the document room. In the dusty room where various documents were stored, I opened a cardboard box near the entrance and pulled out a thick bundle tied with a black string. It was my work diary from the past. Looking back from my first day of work, forgotten memories come back. The times when I was a novice who knew neither left nor right. When I was taught work carefully. When a senior colleague spoke to me as I learned the job. And when someone treated me to canned coffee when I was down about making a mistake. As I looked at the diary, my mind became set. It's not about whether they accept me or not. I'll convey the truth with gratitude for everything so far, and sincerity. With that decided, I left the document room. On Monday's morning assembly, I was to tell my colleagues about my transfer. Prompted by my boss, I stepped forward and bowed. Wondering what it was about, everyone was waiting for me to speak. Austin and a colleague who knew the situation were watching from the back of the circle. I told them that I was the CEO's daughter and that I was going to take over the company, and I expressed my gratitude. To my surprise, I was able to say it smoothly, as if I had never been troubled. While being surprised at myself, I looked at everyone's reactions. While they seemed to be shocked, Austin raised his voice, saying congratulations, and more voices of agreement followed. Somehow the atmosphere softened, and I felt relieved. I gratefully received the encouraging words, feeling refreshed. Later, everyone invited me out for drinks. They said it was a celebration for my becoming CEO, so we headed to a pub, much like a year-end party. The large number of participants made me so happy, I felt like crying. I felt confident that I was being accepted to this extent. Since it was a celebration, they booked a different restaurant than usual, and we all got on the train. We got off after about 15 minutes, arriving at a popular pub known for its delicious seafood. We livened up the place with random chats, and as the drinks flowed, I was wrapped in a fluffy sense of joy. After a while, I checked the time, and nearly 2 hours had passed. Wanting to sober up a bit, I headed to the restroom. The pub was bustling at 8 p.m. Every seat was filled. As I was looking around, intrigued by this first-time visit, a familiar voice caught my ear. Involuntarily, I paid attention. The voice seemed to be berating someone. Contrary to my desire to leave immediately, my body was moving toward the source of the voice. It was a strange feeling, as if my body wasn't my own. Everyone in the seminar knew, even though she tried to hide it. If she weren't the CEO's daughter, no one would date such a plain girl. At the table of 4 men in suits, there was the person I expected. She works in a factory, but is she really the CEO's daughter? She dresses so plain. I never feel like taking her to a nice restaurant. Maybe if she invited me to her family's mansion, I'd be a little motivated. I couldn't comprehend what the familiar and beloved voice was saying. Cooper noticed me standing still. He seemed quite drunk, his eyes fixed. His resentment and hatred for me came through clearly, and I couldn't move. Do you think you're worth something? The only thing you have is your status as the CEO's daughter. Cooper, glaring at me, didn't seem to realize I was actually there. With unsteady steps, Cooper approached me. He tilted the glass in his right hand and poured beer over me. The liquid that had filled the glass drenched my hair and face. Droplets fell, wetting the floor. What a waste of years being with you. Let's break up. Ugh, I'll break up with you. All I could do was nod at Cooper's loud declaration. Quietly moving away from Cooper with my dirtied face, I told my colleagues that I'd be heading home first. Luckily, they were all tipsy and didn't seem to care. As I left the restaurant, the cool night air touched my cheeks. The droplets in my hair cooled down, the chill reaching my scalp as if to freeze it. Feeling hesitant to get on the train like this, I reluctantly called for a car. When I was appointed CEO, my father had given me a personal vehicle. The driver assigned to me was someone I had known since childhood, and the car was familiar. I was looking at the national highway filled with cars, wanting to relax in the familiar seat. Then, the entrance of the pub opened, and someone came out. You're still here? Looking so shabby. Really pathetic. Held up by what was probably a colleague, there was Cooper, unstable on his feet. My heart was torn to shreds. I couldn't take any more of Cooper's words. Such violent words. Sorry to keep you waiting, CEO. A voice came from behind me. Cooper looked at me, eyes wide. Please, get in here. Prompted to the back seat, I moved my feet. Wait a minute. That was a joke. You should have told me if you were appointed CEO. Let's keep going out. I saw Cooper desperately trying to convince me over my shoulder. I felt nothing. If anything, a faint sense of disgust. The CEO is tired. Please leave. Once the driver confirmed I was in, he closed the door. As the car started moving, my tears burst forth. They kept flowing, running down from my chin, dropping onto my lap. What did I ever love about him? I didn't know he was that kind of person. After a good cry, my heart began to settle, and suddenly, I thought it was my fault. Staying as lovers without showing my true self was an unreasonable story. Thinking so, my feelings began to lighten. Wiping the tears with a handkerchief, I turned my eyes outside the window. Clouds were passing across the starry sky. It felt as if I was at the bottom of the sea, the comfort of drifting, surrendering to the gentle sway of the waves. I thought about my colleagues at the factory, and then about Austin. Being accepted for who I am feels really reassuring. Rubbing my swollen eyes from crying too much, I fell asleep, just like that. A year and a half has passed since I became CEO. Even after my transfer to the head office, every time I felt nostalgic, I visited the factory under the pretext of inspection. Today, too, I'm visiting with some gifts. It's just like you, Lydia, to say it's tough, but carry on without a problem. I'm impressed. That's not true. I'm always being supported. Spreading out the snacks I brought, I felt a smile spreading across my face. Even after becoming CEO, my colleagues at the factory still call me Lydia. It feels like I've come home. As I was basking in happiness, Austin started a conversation. By the way, what should we do about our honeymoon? Suddenly, he brought up something personal, and I looked around in surprise. The colleagues I was chatting with earlier seemed to have returned to their workstations. Be careful! We haven't announced it yet. After my transfer, we became even closer from frequent visits to the factory, started dating, and finally got engaged last month. It's okay. I checked and no one's around. Where do you want to go? Do you prefer overseas? I'd like to go to the sea. My mouth moved before I could think. Why was that? I had always thought that if I were to go with Austin, I'd want to go to the sea. If it's the sea, an island might be nice too. I'll look it up. Austin laughed as I said, I'm looking forward to it. I wonder what color the sea will be as I sit on the beach with Austin in the bright light. Just imagining it makes my heart flutter and my cheeks relax into a smile.
Hey, Mom, bring me a beer.
Huh? Mother-in-law, did you lose your hearing all of a sudden?
You can hear me, right? Hey, I told you to bring me a beer.
This is how it always goes when my son and his wife speak to me. We've been living together for 5 years, and they've never listened to me, always ignoring what I have to say. When they do speak to me, it's always just orders, like I'm some sort of maid. Jean, my daughter-in-law, speaks ill of me for everyone to hear, and Paul, my son, treats me like a housekeeper without a second thought. Ignoring them, I turn my back and pretend to watch the TV, acting as if I can't hear them. I'm at the end of my tether with these two, who only listen when they want something, but ignore me otherwise. After a while of ignoring them, Jean picks up the TV remote and shuts off the show I was watching. Startled, I looked up when she said loudly right into my ear, "Hey, mother-in-law, can you hear me? Make sure you prepare Paul's lunch tomorrow, got it?" Her voice was so loud that it made my ears ring, and I involuntarily grimaced. Seeing this, my daughter-in-law laughed, saying, "Seems like you heard it," and left the living room with my son. Wouldn't she at least try to be a bit more considerate, since I am, after all, her husband's mother, and she relies on me on a daily basis? That's what I thought. But judging from my son's attitude, I'm probably nothing more than a housemaid in her eyes. In the end, there was no apology from the two of them, nor did I feel any consideration towards me. Feeling frustrated, I sent an email to my husband and decided to leave the house. My name is Karen. I will be turning 72 this year. 5 years ago, my son and his wife asked if they could live with me because they were worried about the future and wanted to save money. Ever since then, we have been living together as two families under one roof.
If you live with us, you'll feel safer, right, Mom?
You might be right. My husband is a workaholic who started his own company when he was young and continues to work tirelessly even at the age of 73. Because of his nature, the house felt quiet ever since our son moved out. Even when I consulted my husband about our son and his wife moving in with us, his only response was,
"Do whatever you like."
So as there wasn't much conversation and I felt a bit bored, I agreed to live together, hoping that life would become a bit more lively. When we started living together, Jean, my son's wife, and I split our housework. However, as she started saying, "My part-time job is getting busier," the workload for me gradually increased. Although she helps out when asked, she often does so reluctantly, goes out on her days off, or lazes around in her room, so I stopped asking for her help. I ended up taking on all the household tasks, and it became the norm, making me feel unappreciated. Even during meal times when the whole family is present, there is hardly any conversation. I suppose I've been numb to this, as it was the same way with my husband. One day, while I was preparing dinner for 3 as usual, I received a message from my husband saying,
"I'll be late for work. Don't eat dinner."
This was not unusual, but the problem was with my son and his wife.
"Dad's coming home late, huh? I don't eat dinner either."
"Oh, I'm going out with a friend, so I don't eat it either." "Why are you telling me this now? I've already made it," I exclaimed.
"It's fine, just leave it for tomorrow."
Despite it being dinner time, if I didn't say anything, they were about to go without a word. They could have told me if I didn't need to prepare them dinner in the first place. As long as they weren't inconvenienced, they would never even reach out to me first. I couldn't help but complain at their rudeness, but they left without a hint of remorse. What am I working so hard for? In the quiet living room, I was staring blankly at the dinner I had already prepared, which would now go to waste. What on earth am I doing? Thinking about it made me feel utterly exhausted. I covered the still warm dinner with plastic wrap, put it in the fridge, and decided to go to bed. The next morning when I came down to the living room, my husband, who had woken up earlier, apologized, saying,
"I'm sorry."
As usual, our exchange was brief. It should have ended there, but seeing the look on my face, my husband furrowed his brows slightly and asked,
"Didn't Paul and his wife eat dinner?"
"Huh? No, they said they didn't eat dinner and went out."
"I see."
I guess he saw the dinner for 3 in the fridge and asked. I was happy to have a conversation after a long time, so I told my husband about what happened last night. My reticent husband sat quietly, listening to me. After hearing me out, he gently said, "You don't have to push yourself." He acknowledged, "Our son's attitude is getting worse day by day. But if I don't take care of the house, nobody will, right? That doesn't mean you have to overdo it." His words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I realized that I had been pushing myself, and was happy that my husband understood this. My son and his wife aren't small children anymore, so there was no need for me to work so hard. With that thought, my view of the situation seemed to brighten. "I might be late from work again, so you don't need to prepare dinner for me tonight." "Okay," I said, smiling at my husband's words. I decided to let my son and his wife understand this as well. Despite it being a Sunday, I waved goodbye to my husband and resolved to rebel against my son and his wife. After my husband left, my son and his wife finally woke up in the afternoon. Still in their pajamas, they came into the living room and immediately asked, "What's for lunch?" "Why don't you eat what's left from yesterday?"
"But you could at least warm it up for us, or set it on the table."
"You're not small children. You can do it yourself." "Well, mother-in-law, you are getting old, aren't you?" Jean, my daughter-in-law, joked with a laugh, which prompted Paul, my son, to join in the laughter while looking at me. I'm exhausted because Jean hasn't been helping with the housework at all. "Oh, can't you manage without me? Is it your menopause or something?" Jean retorted, laughing at me. I could only sigh at their attitudes. The two of them went back to their room without cleaning up after eating, seemingly unbothered. As expected, my husband didn't return until late that night. Since I didn't need to prepare dinner for my husband, I bought myself a ready-made meal from the supermarket.
"Huh, Mom? What are you eating?"
"Ready-made food."
"What about dinner?"
"I don't know." "Mother-in-law, what are you thinking? Have you forgotten about your family?" I wondered if Jean was incapable of having a conversation without throwing in some barb. I decided to ignore my daughter-in-law, which seemed to quiet Paul down. However, he quickly picked up his phone and started complaining again.
"You don't work, Mom. You should at least take care of the house."
I thought that since it was their day off, they could prepare their own meals for once. As I thought this, they decided to order a delivery.
"Give us the money later,"
Paul said, which made me lose my patience. Since they wanted to save, I agreed to not let them pay our living expense, and I never bothered them about it. But I never imagined them to take advantage of me like this. I decided to ignore them completely, not providing any services to my son and daughter-in-law, who showed such disrespect.
"Hey, Mom, beer."
"Oh, has mother-in-law suddenly gone deaf?"
"You can hear us, right? We're asking for beer,"
Paul demanded, while Jean kept on making snide remarks, and Paul talked to me like I was their housemaid. Ignoring them, I turned my back and deliberately watched TV, pretending not to hear. When I didn't respond for a while, she seemed to give up and stop talking to me. But this peace was short-lived. Before I knew it, my daughter-in-law, who had come up behind me, picked up the TV remote and turned off the TV. Startled, I looked up, only for her to shout into my ear, "Hey, mother-in-law, can you hear me? Make sure to prepare lunch for Paul tomorrow, okay?" Her voice was so loud that it hurt my ears, making me wince involuntarily. Looking at me, my daughter-in-law laughed, saying, "Looks like she heard me," and left the living room with Paul. I wondered why she didn't consider showing a bit of courtesy, given that I'm her husband's mother and she depends on me regularly. But observing Paul's attitude, it seemed like I was nothing more than a housemaid to her. As it turned out, there was no sign of consideration for me at all, and I didn't even hear an apology for last night's dinner from either of them. Sighing deeply, I sent a text to my husband and decided to leave the house. Early next morning, I packed my belongings and left the house before they woke up. When I arrived at a nearby business hotel, my phone was filled with texts from Paul, who seemed to have just woken up before heading to work. Apparently, they were in quite a chaos this morning. Texts and calls from both of them quickly filled my phone with notifications. When I opened the text, I saw nothing but complaints, such as,
"What are you doing? I told you I'll need lunch."
Jean also sent a text in a mocking tone. "Are you wandering around after forgetting your responsibilities?" It seemed they had a hard time just because I didn't prepare breakfast for them, which made me laugh a little. When I saw a call from Paul, who seemed to be on his lunch break, I decided to finally talk to him.
"You finally picked up. Mom, where the hell are you and what are you doing?"
"It's none of your business, is it?"
"You didn't even prepare our food. Where are you?"
"Paul, you're not a child. You can make your own food, can't you?" I answered him with a mix of irritation. If he had struggled so much to prepare just one meal, he should have reflected a little and thanked me. But to my surprise, he came back with a word I never expected.
"I'm paying for living expenses, so I need you to do the housework."
"Living expenses? What are you talking about? I never received such a thing."
"Huh? Why not? Jean should have been giving it to you every month, so don't lie."
Paul insisted that he was paying me living expenses. I've never received anything of the sort, and when I truthfully denied it, Paul started calling me a liar. The truth is, my husband covers all of their living expenses, including their food expenses. Even after repeatedly saying this, Paul refused to believe me. I could hear Jean in the background saying, "You're probably just playing dumb and spending it for yourself." Unable to continue the conversation, I cut them off and said, "I don't know what I don't know, and I don't plan to come home for a while."
"Why not? What are we supposed to do for food?"
"Figure it out yourselves. Bye now." I hung up the phone and let out another big sigh. Why do they believe they're not in the wrong, even after all this? I didn't understand what Paul was talking about earlier, when he mentioned about our living expenses. The situation improved about a week after I left the house. My husband, who had come to check on me, apparently talked to Paul and Jean, and their text suddenly became more respectful and submissive. Wondering what had happened, I received a text from my husband.
"Paul and Jean want to apologize. If you feel like it, please come home."
Thanks to my husband's talk, they finally seemed to understand. I replied to my husband's text, made preparations, and decided to go home that day. When I returned home, Paul and Jean were waiting at the entrance, their faces pale and worn out. It seems that they were quite upset by the lecture from my husband. I decided to hear the story about this past week from them and my husband.
"About the living expenses I mentioned on the phone."
I said I didn't receive them, right? You said you wanted to save money, so I didn't say anything.
"Actually, Dad was really mad at us about that."
It seems that my son had told his father about his contribution to the household expenses. It appeared that he believed I had been lying, and throughout he seemed to have painted me as the villain when speaking with his father. However, when his father explained that there was no way I could be splurging, as I was busy from morning to night with cleaning, shopping, preparing meals for 3 people, and doing the laundry while showing him our household book, he quieted down. "You couldn't even believe me?"
"But Jean kept saying that she was giving you the money."
"So what happened to your living expenses?" "I was using them." From my son's perspective, he was definitely paying the money, so he must have been baffled that the money was not reaching me. It seems that my husband and son confronted Jean and made her confess. At first, Jean was playing dumb, but when my husband started yelling at her, she finally confessed everything. I was shocked to hear this, as I had never seen my husband yell before. Apparently, Jean had been spending the money on dining out and going out with her colleagues from her part-time job. She had been going to fancy restaurants to show off and pocketing any leftover money for herself, she explained in a feeble voice. I'm appalled. She was accusing me of squandering money on the phone, but it turns out she was just talking about herself. But living with my in-laws can be stifling, and everyone was inviting me, so I just...
Just because of that, you thought it was okay to embezzle our living expenses. You made me look like a fool too.
What? You are acting all high and mighty too. At the point when the two of them began to stray from the topic and argue, my husband cleared his throat loudly. The two of them, seemingly terrified of my husband, jumped up in surprise and immediately became silent. I couldn't help but laugh at their behavior, like children who had been caught doing mischief.
Excuses, excuses. Cut the crap. First, you should sincerely apologize to your mom. Dad, I was also deceived by Jean. So, does that excuse your attitude towards your mother? Neither of you has apologized to her since she returned. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Finally, the two of them bowed their heads to me. Still, my son was making excuses, saying that he had been taking it easy because it was his home.
I've been getting busy at work and I just wanted to relax at home. So what about your mother, who is being taken for granted and mocked by her big son and his wife even at her own home?
My husband's words cut through my son's excuses, leaving him speechless. I'm appalled at my son, who despite his age still relies on his parents, and at Jean, who took advantage of that to embezzle money.
Mom, I'm sorry. You see, I'm apologizing to you.
Do you think an apology makes everything okay? Please reflect on yourself a bit. The two of them thought that bowing their heads to me would resolve everything smoothly, and they were flustered by my words and tried to make excuses. But I could see through their scheme, and I shook my head. Whether you contribute to the living expenses or not, I can't overlook that attitude. You have to learn to be more grateful. But aren't you worried about your future too, mother-in-law? Yes, I'm full of worries about relying on people like you.
How can you talk to us like that?
You splurged our living expense out of stress from living with us. I can't have someone like you stay with us any longer. The two of them finally quieted down, realizing that I was not willing to listen anymore. They need to learn once again how rude their actions were while living together as a couple. Later, we managed to have them move out. In the days that followed, Jean, my son's wife, started to come to our house occasionally to learn household chores from me. She continually vented about how my son Paul did not lift a finger to help with any housework. As she had always been showing off to her colleagues, I assumed she couldn't complain to anyone else now. I now understand just how much I relied on you, Karen. Indeed. And yet, you had the audacity to accuse me of being deaf and squandering money. Being no longer able to live with us and having lost the pocket money she freely used before, plus having her part-time wages limited to make up for the money she previously misused, Jean fervently complained about her now austere life. But however I listened, all I could think was that she was just reaping what she had sown. As for Paul, he started to bring home delicious snacks as gifts from time to time, as if making up for his previous lack of consideration, which he still mentioned occasionally. I've always known he wasn't the most articulate and was primarily focused on work. Nevertheless, I was touched by the fact that he recognized my hard work during our discussions with Paul and Jean. Thanks for your hard work, honey. I appreciate it. I'm glad that I can talk to my husband like this again. I deeply feel the truth in the saying, after a storm comes a calm. Regardless of how it started, I'm now leading a life that is calmer and happier than before.